What I liked was the great variety and the way in which it's considered both questions of institutions and policies and also questions of interests and values. It's been quite extraordinary how the project has managed to deal with dissensus in so many different ways and actually come to some really interesting but perhaps very depressing conclusions.
Dissensus at the end of the project probably is a concept which is still more complicated than at the beginning. So we could see overall the project very different meaning of dissensus, very different stages of dissensus, and so it is a very complex concept. Sometimes it can be, of course, useful as it is part of liberal democracy and of the European Union, of course, as well, and also of the member states. But at the same time, it can become a concept which is difficult to manage when it comes to the most destructive forms.
In terms of central findings from my own perspective, they've been around the concept of dissensus. One, that actually it was underdeveloped, and this project has really brought the issue to the fore for two reasons, I guess. One, in the sense that in terms of the empirical work, it's shown how important it is in terms of a deeper understanding of contestation and what contestation misses. And secondly, in terms of just the empirics also, where actually the initial typology of dissensus didn't capture the complexity of what has been found in the empirical evidence. So the theory and the concept has complemented the empirics, and the empirics have helped to build what we understand by dissensus.
I think my understanding of dissensus has deepened. I initially saw it as mainly populist, anti-system politics, but what we get a sense is it's much more than that, because it's about the challenges to liberal democracy from all sorts of illiberalism, not only from the extremes on the right and to a lesser extent on the left, but also from the mainstream. And the way in which we're seeing the erosion of national institutions, of EU institutions, and also in terms of the discourse on questions of civil rights, human rights.
We define dissensus, and I worked with other colleagues from RED-SPINEL, and I would mention here Nathalie Brack. So we define dissensus as a conflict over the meaning of liberal democracy. We started from the assumption that in the current context, values in the European Union have been taken for granted, and that today we see more conflicts over the meaning. What do we mean by liberal democracy? What is the essence of that? And what are the other values which are associated or related to this ideal, political ideal? We arrived at the conclusion that dissensus can be mild when there are disagreements about the practice of liberal democracy, but the actors involved in decision-making have more or less similar views, so this is mild dissensus. This is something easy, and we can see it in many, many debates. Then we can have a severe dissensus, and in this case, dissensus is still about the practice of liberal democracy, but then the positions of the actors are more diverse, and this is very difficult to reach agreements. Then disruptive and destructive dissensus, they are both forms of dissensus about the essence of liberal democracy, and here what this differentiate or distinguish one form from the other is that for disruptive dissensus, the actors have homogeneous view. They can say, well, there is something wrong with the values in the Constitution, or there is something wrong with the judicial independence, but still the actors have similar or converging views. For the destructive forms of dissensus, it is the ideal of liberal democracy which is contested, and then we also see that the actors have a variety of, the preferences of the actors are very diverse.
So dissensus as, of course, a risk for the European integration process, but also as an opportunity to rethink the European project.
For me, for a legal and constitutional law perspective, dissensus means when something which is a rule, so it must be observed, it is not observed at all for more than few years. This is the case of several member states in the European Union, but Broadly speaking, I could also add that dissensus is when the so-called European society is not properly consolidating at all.
So we define dissensus as a conflict over the meaning and a conflict taking place between different kinds of actors. It is not only political actors, it is also social and legal actors. And this conflict takes different forms because it is a conflict which can pertain to, for example, the implementation of liberal democracy and its failures, but it can be also a conflict over the ideal of liberal democracy. And here we see some actors trying to maintain what we have, a model which is not perfect but still, actors trying to improve the liberal democracy and others trying to replace liberal democracy with what is called alternative models, but very often those alternative models are illiberal democracies which are not really democracies.